There is a kind of Christian who has not felt convicted in years and calls it peace. He can quote the verse before you finish the sentence. He knows the doctrine cold. He can defend grace better than most pastors defend the pulpit, and that is exactly why nothing touches him anymore. Somewhere along the way, he learned to use truth the way a surgeon uses a needle, not to heal the wound, but to make sure he never feels it again. If that sentence made something in your chest tighten, keep listening, because what I'm about to describe isn't rebellion. It isn't backsliding in the way you'd recognize it. It's something far more dangerous because it wears the face of sound doctrine. You know the type, maybe you are the type. Someone brings up a sin, a pattern, a compromise, and instead of the heartbreaking, out comes a verse: sovereignty, grace. God knows my heart. Nobody's perfect. The words are true. Every syllable of them is technically, theologically true. And that's the horror of it. A lie would be easier to catch. A half-truth wrapped in scripture, spoken with a straight face, slides past every alarm you own. This is not about people who don't know the Bible. This is about people who know it too well to let it work on them anymore. Think of it like this: a nerve gets injured, and instead of treating the wound, a doctor blocks the nerve. The pain disappears instantly. The patient smiles, thanks him, walks out relieved. But underneath the numbness, the wound is still open. It's still bleeding. It's just that nobody can feel it happening, including the one it's happening to. That is what happens when a true doctrine gets used the wrong way. Grace doesn't change, sovereignty doesn't change, but the way a heart reaches for them can turn medicine into anesthesia. And a soul under anesthesia doesn't know it's dying, it just knows it doesn't hurt anymore. Here's what makes this so easy to miss: a nerve block wears off gradually, not all at once, which means the numbness doesn't announce itself. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, today I decided to stop feeling my sin. It happens one dose at a time, one verse used slightly wrong, one excuse that technically checks out, repeated often enough, quietly enough, until feeling nothing has simply become the new normal. And here's what should unsettle you: nerves don't stay blocked forever. Anesthesia wears off. Wounds left untreated don't heal quietly in the dark. They get worse, they spread, and one day the numbness fails at the worst possible moment. What you don't feel now, you will feel later, and by then the cost of ignoring it will already be paid, often somewhere far more public, far more painful than if it had been treated the moment it first appeared. Somewhere in a quiet, ordinary week, a believer stops praying about a sin because he stopped feeling guilty about it, not because he repented, not because he was set free, because he found the right verse to make the guilt go quiet. And once the guilt goes quiet, the Spirit's voice starts to sound like background noise instead of a warning siren. Watch how fast this spreads once it starts. First it's one compromise excused by one verse. Then it's a whole vocabulary. Grace covers it. God's not surprised. Nobody's without sin, built not to draw you closer to holiness, but to keep you comfortable in its absence. The words haven't changed. Only their job has. They used to point you to the cross. Now they point you to the couch. There's a phenomenon doctors talk about called tolerance. The body needs a higher dose over time to feel the same relief. Spiritually, it works the same terrifying way. The first compromise needed a whole verse to justify it. The 10th compromise barely needs a sentence. Eventually, a person can excuse almost anything with a single half-remembered phrase because the mechanism has been trained, rehearsed, perfected. What used to require real theological gymnastics now happens instantly, almost like breathing. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because most people assume the danger is out there, in the obvious sinner, the prodigal, the one everybody can see is far from God. But the anesthetized heart doesn't look far from God. It sits in the pew, it sings the songs, it even teaches the class. On paper, it looks healthier than the addict, the adulterer, the outright rebel, because at least their pain is visible. At least somebody's still checking on the wound. The numbed heart has convinced everyone, including itself, that there's nothing left to check. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Cheap grace and false peace don't feel like sin from the inside. They feel like maturity. They feel like finally understanding theology instead of being ruled by emotion. The very sophistication that should have deepened this person's walk becomes the wall that protects them from it. Picture two people sitting in the very same service. One of them is fighting something ugly, wrestling, ashamed, praying through gritted teeth for strength she doesn't feel yet. The other has already won the argument in his head before the sermon even started, verse loaded, conscience pre-numbed, ready to nod along without ever being touched by a single word. To everyone watching, the second person looks stronger, steadier, more at peace. But peace that was never fought for isn't peace. It's just the absence of a struggle that used to be there. And a struggle that disappears without a victory didn't end. It went underground. This is rarely noticed because it doesn't look dangerous. It looks composed. It looks like the very stability everyone claims to want. Nobody stands up to warn against calm. Nobody preaches caution toward people who no longer seem troubled. So the quiet approval, subtle as it is, keeps flowing toward exactly the condition that should be raising the most alarm, someone who has stopped being troubled by the very things that once broke him. There's a strange condition where a person loses a limb but keeps feeling pain in a place that no longer exists. The nerves misfire, the brain fills in signals that aren't real. Something like the reverse happens here. The conscience is still fully intact, still attached, still capable of speaking, but it's been trained not to fire. The problem was never that God stopped speaking. It's that a well-rehearsed doctrine has been standing between the voice and the ear long enough that silence started to feel like holiness. Consider the parable that should terrify comfortable believers more than any other. The man who buried what was given to him instead of risking it, not out of malice, but out of a calculated, reasonable-sounding excuse. He wasn't lazy in the way the world understands lazy. He had a doctrine for his inaction. He had a reason his master would surely understand, and it wasn't enough, because faith that explains away its own stillness is still stillness. A theology precise enough to excuse a cold heart is not proof of depth. It's proof the anesthesia is working exactly as designed. Think about what happens in an emergency room when a patient arrives numb and can't say where it hurts. The doctors don't trust the absence of pain. They run tests because they know numbness can hide something far worse than what pain would have revealed. Yet in the life of faith, the opposite instinct takes over. The absence of guilt gets mistaken for the presence of health. Nobody runs the test. Nobody asks why the alarm went quiet. The silence itself gets treated as good news, when it might be the very thing that should have triggered concern. So how does someone actually wake up from this? Not by trying harder to feel guilty. That's just another performance, another dose of something designed to manage the symptom instead of treating the cause. It starts by asking the one question the anesthetized heart avoids without exception. Not is this technically defensible, but has this made me more obedient or just more comfortable being disobedient? That single question cuts straight past the doctrine and into the nerve underneath it. Because here is the truth this whole message has been circling. Real grace was never meant to remove the ability to feel conviction. It was meant to remove the fear of what conviction demands. Real grace doesn't numb you to your sin. It gives you the courage to finally look straight at it without collapsing under shame. The moment doctrine stops doing that and starts doing the opposite, it has stopped being grace at all. It has become the very anesthesia it was never designed to be. And there's something almost merciful hidden inside that realization. If the wound can still be found, it can still be treated. A conscience that's gone completely silent forever is far harder to reach than one that still flinches, even faintly, when it's told the truth. So if something in you just flinched while hearing this, that flinch isn't condemnation. It's the nerve trying to wake back up. It's the first sign the anesthesia hasn't fully won yet. Maybe that's what today was actually about, not shaming the doctrine you love, but asking what you've quietly let it do to you. Somewhere between the verse you know by heart and the sin you no longer feel, a decision was made, and it wasn't made by God. Whatever is numbing you right now was allowed to go numb, which means it can be allowed to wake up too. The pain you've been avoiding was never your enemy. It was the last honest signal telling you the wound is still open and still worth healing. The question left standing after everything said here isn't whether your theology is correct. It's whether you've been using it to walk toward God or to walk away from Him while telling yourself you never moved at all.